Good morning, Professor Rose. Thank you for your time.
It's a great pleasure to be talking to you, Chris.
Now, you've produced a dummy's guide to the planning documents that are currently out for consultation. What's the reasoning behind this?
Well, Chris, let me tell you the story. I'll try and make it brief. I became a counsellor about 18 months ago, and shortly after I started counsel, I was thrown into the deep end of the planning story. We had probably, 40 or 50 hours of seminars and presentations, and I was almost more confused at the end of that than I was at the beginning. But what I realised is a very complicated process. And so what I eventually come to understand is this is a government-mandated consultation with the community. It happens every year in the planning process, and we've got about 22,000 people in our region, 15,000 ratepayers, and these documents are put on public display, as they say, except that no one ever reads them. Now, I think last year we had about 11 people provide responses. It's actually required that we put this information out for the public to make decisions. And this is decisions about where we go and what we do in our community. Now, I've just got these documents sitting on the table here. You can see these documents run to about 400 pages or so.
It's like the Encyclopedia Britannica.
Most people don't get any feedback either. So what I've tried to do, you probably remember you've seen those dummies guides to producers or a dummies guide to this. I'm not saying that we've got dummies in the area, but I'm a dummy myself. I couldn't understand this. And so I've tried to produce a document that's only 7 pages that can give people a sort of an overview and a look at what's required.
So let's walk through your guide then. Your document is only 6 pages. Could you outline it for the listeners?
Yeah, so it's very important for people to understand the big picture. So we start with the community strategic plan. That's required to be produced every time there's a new council. So that happened last year. It was consultation with the community again. Not many people gave some feedback, but I'll tell you that it does make a difference. I talked to a number of people about my concern about the fact that the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals were included in our plan. The United Nations Sustainable Development Goals have got nothing to do with our region, and a number of people wrote in about it, and those goals were taken out. So feedback does make a difference. So the community strategic plan happens every 4 years. Then there's a 4-year delivery program. This one started in 2025 and has been updated this year. And that gives sort of an overview of what's happening over the 4-year period. Then there's an operational plan, which is just what's happening in the 1 year. And there's the long-term financial plan. And there's also asset management strategy and a workforce plan. So we've got more plans than we know what to do with. Really, no one understands them and no one reads them. And so I think it's a really important issue for us, because one of the things that I'm really concerned about is that council's making a range of decisions with inadequate input from people. I've done a bit of research myself, and I discovered that a number of councils have a thing called deliberative panels. Now, these are randomly selected representative group of local residents that are given all the information. They'd spend a day, say, being presented with the information, and then they can provide informed feedback. I think it's really the way to go. It's costly. It probably costs 50 or 60,000, but there's nothing in the overall scheme of things, because at the moment we're putting a lot of effort into getting feedback, and the feedback I think is of not much use. I think we need more input from residents, more genuine feedback from residents. So I think we definitely need to consider these deliberative panels, and that's something I've put up to the council. Of course, because it costs money, it's difficult to get any definite feedback about that. But I'm going to keep on pushing for that, because one of the best tools we've got at the moment is the annual community satisfaction survey.
This is the Taverna study?
The Taverna survey that's been done for the last, I think, 5 years. The results are pretty bad.
Only 3% were highly satisfied?
Exactly. But at least it's statistically valid information. Whereas just people that write in at random, or particular people that go to a pop-up, it's not valid at all. You might hear information, but it's not valid. So I think we need a complete rethink about the way we consult the community. And I would like to see this deliberative panel idea go forward. And I'm going to put forward a proposal next year, because this takes time to come through about this process for deliberative panels. We need better statistical information. It's useless getting information or feedback from 10 or 12 or even 20 people or even 100 out of 22,000.
Yes.
So anyway, what I wanted to do was to try and make it slightly easier for people to understand these 400 pages of documents. So the first page really is just an overview of how the documents fit together. And you can look at it as a bit, if you think about the Russian doll analogy, on the outside is the community strategic plan. You take that away. In the next one is the delivery program for 4 years. The next one is the operational plan, and then there's the backing with the operational plan with the long-term financial plan. So if we go to page 2 of the document, you can see that the financial overview. This is the budget in a simple way so people can see. So the council's total income for 2026-27 is 106.1 million, and the expenditure is 108 million, or 108.1 million. So we're spending 2 million more than we're bringing in. That's the operating deficit. Now that deficit's not too bad, and we're projected, despite all that, to actually have an improvement in our unrestricted cash funds that are there. But the biggest single source of income is rates and associated charges, and that's 51.4 million. The general rates, which are the land rates only, is 27.7 million of that 51. So it's a bit over 50% of the overall rates and charges. And that includes not just land rates, but also the annual charges then that go through levies on water, sewage and waste funds. So if you look then at the general fund rates, the $27.7 million is added to by water fund rates and charges, which is 3.8 million. And then the sewer fund rates and annual charges, which is 12.02. And then the waste fund rates and annual charges of 7.8 million. So those four things together, the 27.7 for the general rates, the 3.8 for the water fund, the 12 million for the sewer fund, and the 7.8 bring you to the 51.4 million.
So am I correct in my understanding that the general land rates that bring in the 27.7 million would be a deficit if compared against the employee costs of $41.8 million? That the employee costs far exceed what we bring in from general land rates alone.
Correct. And of course, a lot of that, if you look at the number of people in, I suppose you could broadly call it the engineering waste water area, there's a very large number of staff to run the range of water resources we've got around the area and the waste resources. So the actual land rates make up not much more than 25% of the total budget, and employee costs exceed that. The problem for us as a council is those employee costs are rising more quickly than the revenue is coming in. And this year, the employee costs increased at around 9%, which is a range of reasons why. But there's not only CPI adjustments, but there's internal adjustments and requirements that the Local Government Act requires. And the end result of that is that we end up with a rising cost of employees, and particularly because workers' compensation increased by $1 million this
That's
year.
Incredible.
So it's a very significant issue. So
how many full-time employees do you think we have?
We're close to 400, I think. And, there's also contract employees and so forth. But it's a very big workforce. And, of course, that workforce has to cover a very big geographic area from Michalego down to Delegate. And I think that's one of our real problems. You've got to get inefficiency as soon as you have this big amalgamated region. So really, we're relying on a lot of grants, and the federal and state government provide a range of grants for us. But, we've got a significant issue for us, and that is that ultimately the costs are rising higher than the income. And you can imagine, Chris, in this next 12 months, with the issues around fuel prices and so forth, there are going to be some unanticipated costs. And so we can probably bet that the budgeted idea of $1.5 million of unrestricted cash is probably going to disappear. Correct. Now, there was a lot of issue about the special rate variation. I'm never in favour of rate rises, but the special rate variation has helped us get back on our feet. And one of the things that's important that's in the long-term financial plan is that there is a proposal there. It's not set in stone yet, but it's a proposal that the rate variation be extended, what it would look like. And if we had another 4 or 5 years with an increase of around 11 to 12% a year, it would put us in a much better situation. But of course, that comes with a cost, an enormous cost to ratepayers. If you think of a compounding rate of 11% per year,
so the median person out here would be paying over $10,000.
Correct. And so I think that's why I think we have to look on the other side of the fence, and that is how can we cut expenditure and what's actually really vital for us to operate effectively with essential services. Costs are rising. We've had these rate rises. We've come to the last year. Are people happy for that rate rise to be extended? If there's a special rate variation that's extended, because otherwise we'll get a rate rise that happens just as like a CPI. There's a group called IPART that makes the assessment. And this year they've said about a 4% increase. So I think that's a big issue for people to provide their input. But if you look at what we've had this special rate variation has given us a 52.48% cumulative increase spread over 4 years. Now that's
massive.
It's massive, isn't it?
For the average ratepayer with a property of 1.5 million, I think that's an excess of $10,000 a year.
Right.
Sorry, over those 4 years.
Yeah, I think this issue's of 10.75% increase this year is the last year of the approved special rate variation. But if you look in the long-term financial plan documents, and I think it's important for people to have a look at the original documents themselves, you'll find that there's a scenario showing another 10.75% increase in 2029. Now's the time to tell council if you don't want that increase. As a consequence, we're going to have to cut funds out of somewhere, fees and charges where it's going. And that's really on pages pages 3 and 4, which shows us what's changing, what's happening. So the annual waste and management fee for residential property is going up from 151 to 160. That's only about a 6% increase. For residents in Cooma who have this FOGO service, that's food and organic waste bins, that's going up from 201 to 209. So these are very small changes. And some of the specific projects that are really important for Jindabyne residents, including a new pipeline that comes out of SAP funding, a new pump station at East Jindabyne, an upgrade to the Berridale sewage treatment plant, reservoir replacements and repair work on the Cooma Weir. Some of those have an item saying TBD in terms of costs. We don't know what they're going to cost. So I think any issues that people feel concerned about where they don't know the cost, they need to flag that in their submission to council.
Any updates on the Jindabyne transfer facility?
Well, no. The Jindabyne transfer facility, we don't know. We know what the cost is going to be, and it looks like it's about a $4 to $5 million cost to do that. At the moment, the materials are being taken to Cooma. But of course, anything to do with land waste and recycling, all that area is costly. Now, what I've done, if we go through the different pages here, on my last page, I've got here of the Dummies Guide, you'll see areas where you can have some input. I was told that all councils operate pools at a loss. I didn't realise how much a loss. That comes into our community services loss, which is over $8 million. But it's costing us $2.5 million a year that we lose from operating the pools. Now, those are the different pools at Adabini, Cooma, Berridale, Bombala, Jindabyne. What the bottom line of that is, it is a big cost, and it's a cost obviously council has to bear because pools are an important resource, but it's important for people to know it's costing us a lot of money. It's costing each ratepayer a lot of money. To lose $2.5 million is, and we can't put the fees up to charge swimmers, $500 or $1,000 a year to come in. And the ideal thing is for people to go through the operational plan. It is hard though. It's quite detailed, and it's quite hard to actually understand when you go through it. As I looked at the big picture, and I wrote this dummies guide, and from what I've been talking to of people around the region, and I've spent a bit of time in Bombala and Delegate, as well as talked to quite a few people in Mikalago, a lot of course in Jindabyne, and also in Cooma. I've identified 10 areas where I thought people could provide feedback. And the important thing about the process is that council are required to consider the feedback and say what they're going to do about it. So the feedback is not just thrust aside. We'll be given all the feedback in a big file. It'll probably come to several hundred pages. But if there are some themes there, staff will have to make changes to the plan. So you can have an input, and it can be important. So what I outlined was 10 different areas that I thought, from talking to people, they'd be interested to have input into. And that can just be as simple as just writing a 10-line email to council. In the dummies guide, I'll include that at the end about how you can do it. But these are the 10 areas that I thought, that I've heard, were most important to people. Firstly, rate increases. Now, Chris, we ran on a story of no rate increases.
Yep.
That's going to be a hard story to continue.
I continue to abide by that.
But I do as well, because ultimately this is a story where we have to work out the cost benefit. And the real issue, I think, for residents is going to be, what are the basic and essential services that we want? If you don't want rate increases, and in the long-term financial plan, the proposal is for another 10.75% next year continuing, that would get us back into the black earlier. But it comes as a cost. It comes as a cost to every resident, and the rates are going to continue to rise. And so the compounding effect of that is really significant, isn't it?
Oh, it's huge. I suppose, including the deficits, we would have to cut maybe 5 to 10%.
If enough residents think there may be a need for council to really consider cutting key things that are in the non-essential areas. We've got a lot of mandated problems. And look, I've got to say that council is at the end of the line in the government planning process, and we end up having requirements thrust upon us by the state government without any money coming with it. So it is a big problem. But I think those rate increases are the single most important issue, I think, for the people who want to give their feedback.
Absolutely.
Because if they don't want rate increases, then council is going to have to work out how to cut their expenditure.
Can you imagine how a lot of people are going to survive out here when the rates hit over $10,000 a year?
Yeah, no, it's impossible, isn't it? So the second one is our roads. Now, the biggest issue that comes up in the community survey, you can see, is people complaining about their roads. I've got to say, Chris, that council has done a good job in looking at a overview. We had a group come from Wagga, and they made an assessment into different categories, so that it wasn't just a matter of someone ringing up and saying, "Oh, I've got a pothole," but we know this road is this level, this road is this level, and there's a plan to do that. But you can see that the plan quietly changes the wording in the road maintenance, and they say repairs will now be prioritised based on risk and usage and addressed subject to funding availability. Now, risk and usage is fine. I think obviously you need to work out where we can't do everything. We've got 16 or 1700 kilometres of unsealed roads that we've got to deal with. But I think that the issues around roads probably mean more to people than anything else, because there's a whole lot of issues. Now, it's important for people to provide feedback about specific areas of road, whether they think are dangerous or a problem. And those can be included then in the story.
I'm guessing the Barry Way, Mikalego Road, Bumbalong Road, this is the time for them to write in?
Exactly. The Mikalego Road residents got pretty well organised last year, and it was 110 people, so put in submissions. You know, it's very important for people to actually write in and say why and what the issue is. The water and sewage charges, there's a 7 to 8.5% increase in those areas. I think we can't avoid that because there's unfunded liabilities here. It's absolutely critical that these, and I wouldn't have minded seeing a higher increase in water sewage charges because these are things we just have to have and we can't wait for a handout.
And the last thing we want is a Jindabyne water tower collapse.
Exactly. And we've got a number of issues that we've been alerted to by the chief engineer. So I think the waste area is the other area as well. So waste charges are rising. The next one is council-run businesses. And so those are things like caravan parks, sale yards, truck washes. We contribute to the Snowy River Health Centre, for instance, in Jindabyne. Several of these are running at a loss, and residents just need to have a look at the council-run businesses and say, are there things we should be getting out of? I think council got out of aged care a few years ago, and I think that was right because what was happening was that it was run inefficiently. It was costing residents and ratepayers a lot of money. At the moment, we're trying to actually revitalise the old Snowy River Hostel, and that should be a great win if it can come about. In terms of biosecurity, weed control, this is a pet peeve of mine. I've put motions up for a couple of years about the fact we need to be out of the biosecurity space in terms of weed control. And the main reason really is we've been involved in this for a long time and the weeds have just got worse.
I think over the time we must have spent tens of millions. And no outcome.
The weeds have got worse. There are particular notable, potentially invasive species that we need to keep an eye on. But, you know, I think this is an area where we just should cut some money, and I reckon we could cut $1 million out and see no different outcome.
$1 million divided by the ratepayers is a huge amount.
Well, we've got to get some money into unrestricted cash because we haven't got any reserves at the moment. People need to look pretty carefully at community services because there's an $8.4 million deficit in this area. And so these are services that we provide which really have got no choice about. I think people need to understand, that includes, for instance, the $2.5 million for the Coomber Pool, but there are things like community services that are provided from aged care and so forth. I think it is a big issue for us to work out what are the services we need. And obviously people want to see good toilets, clean toilets, want to see parks that are safe.
I think in Jindabyne we just want to see a toilet. And I heard a rumor that over $4 million was spent on the Coomber Pool and it's still not functional.
Well, there's absolutely no water in it. And
over almost $2 million in Coomber and there's still no pool.
Correct. It's a very complicated story. So I think there's a big issue, but it's important for people to look at the community services because there's an $8.4 million deficit in effect there. That's really community support programs, for instance, home care, aged care and transport. Should we be in that space? I don't know. But if we're not in it, who's going to do it? And it's important for our local community. The community facilities, pools, the halls, caravan parks and sale yards, libraries, open space and recreation, and tourism. So I think it's important to look at all those issues. I think if people can have a look at that material in the plan for the operational plan for 2026-27, I think community services isn't uniquely problematic on a deficit. Infrastructure runs at a deficit of 16.7, open space at 7.8, and governance 4.9, ICT 5.1, the built a natural environment 5.1. I suppose most of those have got clear structural reasons, road and asset depreciation, overhead functions, and residents can largely accept them. The big area of community services is important because it's about what people really want and what's absolutely key. If you keep on wanting those things, then you're going to have to accept a continuing rate rise. If you don't want it, we need to make that known to council. But the capital works around $29.9 million is planned for 2026-27. That's about $30 million. And it's really important to actually have a look at those capital works programs that are outlined. And residents should ask for transparent, publicly stated criteria on how that infrastructure money is spent. And the final area, I think, is customer service. We've had over 5 years of very bad feedback about customer service.
Very bad. I think it fluctuates between 2 or 3% only being satisfied.
Yes, the most recent survey showed that 56% of residents are dissatisfied with the council's performance. And what's planned this year is a customer service reboot program. But we were concerned because there's no baseline data, there's no measurable targets, and there's no reporting timeline. So a plan without any accountability is of not much value. So I think people need to, if they're concerned about that, need to write and say, look, we want to know how it's going to be improved. I think in terms of residents and ratepayers, I think it's important for people just to reinforce the fact that they want to see better customer service. There have been some improvements this year. Now, finally, Chris, I think...
So how can people have their say?
Well, they can have their say, and I've got some details there on the background. You can actually write. There's a PO. You can write to the PO box. It's PO Box 714 Cooma. The simplest thing is just to email, and it's council@snowymonaro.newsouthwales.gov.au.
What should the subject heading be for this?
The council just should say
draft documents,
response to draft plan.
Response to draft plan.
Yes. If you just think of an additional thing, you can write it in. If something comes to you, it'll be consolidated. But council staff are required to give a response. They're required to look at all the feedback, and for that feedback to come to the council meeting, which will happen probably in June. And it's very important, I think, that people realise their responses are really taken seriously. And if there's enough people on a particular subject, it will have an impact. I think the key thing is really that people need to take the time to do it. I think this little dummies guide, this 6-page document, I need to say quite clearly, this isn't mandated by the council. It's got no official status at all. It was simply a response that I decided I'd use because I've been so frustrated, and I've talked to people all over the region, and no one can make sense of the planning documents. Now, the planning documents are required by the New South Wales government. You can't make your way through them easily. Nonetheless, they determine what happens in our area. I think we're going to have to do much better in terms of something like these deliberative panels, a much stronger statistical base for looking at the issues that residents and ratepayers are concerned about when it comes up to the next community strategic plan, because everything comes out of that. People don't know it, and I didn't know it, but everything falls out of the community strategic plan. And if we don't get that right, and it doesn't reflect the wishes of, the whole region, then we're in real trouble because we end up with the wrong priorities being dealt with. The Dummies Guide is just a small work that might make a bit of a difference. I hope it helps people in getting a bit better sense about what's going on with our plans. Over the next month, there's going to be a series of pop-up consultations around the place. People can go along to those. The best data we have is the community survey. That's going every November, and it's very important if you get the call to spend the time talking to the person so you can give your input there.
Thank you, Professor Rose. You've presented us with some very good facts, and we appreciate the initiative that you've taken to translate these 400, 500, 600-page documents into 6 pages that the community can easily understand. And I know that you've given up not just your time preparing these documents, but your time in the last 2 years keeping the community informed and aware of what's going on. So I really appreciate that. And I suppose now it's up to the locals really to take responsibility for how they use this information to make contact and to make known their concerns to the relevant people in the council.
Yes. the important thing, I think, is that council is responsive to feedback. The problem is they just don't get it. And if you think when he had 11 responses out of 22,000, I mean, it's just impossible. So people need to take some responsibility. If they don't, they've got to do it, accept the outcome that's there. People really need to engage with this. And this was my attempt to help in that process. It mightn't be perfect, but I think it's at least another tool with the Dummies Guide to just help people to have an understanding. And Chris, I also made a quick reference page with key figures about the plans in terms of the total budget, the rate increase, the general rates and so forth that are there. So that little document you can put up as well, because I think that's quite a helpful tool for people just to have an understanding, because, you know, I certainly didn't understand how much we're spending, how much the general rates were bringing in and so forth. So it's good to have an understanding of those bits of information. So thanks for the opportunity to provide the information.
Thank you, Professor Rose, for your time.